Welcome to This Explainer. We're going to keep it snappy and get straight to the bones of it. So let's dive right in. This is the single biggest question working families are asking right across the country right now. When people talk about immigration and money here in Ireland, it nearly always boils down to this. Do people coming here contribute more, or do they cost the state a fortune? It sounds like it should be a straightforward bit of maths, doesn't it? You'd think you could just tally up the columns. But to be honest with you, a simple back-of-the-envelope calculation just doesn't exist. It's actually one of the most misunderstood parts of the whole debate. It completely depends on timeframes, employment, and how exactly you measure those costs over a person's lifetime.
Section 1. The big fiscal question.
Okay, so on one side of the equation, we have the contributions. Every single time you get your payslip, you see the deductions, right? Income tax, PRSI, the USC, plus the indirect taxes like the VAT you pay at the till when you're doing the big shop. That hard-earned money from working people is the absolute engine of the state. Now, on the flip side, that exact same money has to fund everything we rely on as a society. It's keeping the lights on in our hospitals, it's paying our teachers, keeping social welfare supports going for those who need a dig out, and of course, fixing the roads. The entire fiscal balance of Ireland relies on having enough money coming in from workers on the one hand to comfortably fund absolutely everything on the other.
Section 2. Short-term costs explained. Well, in the very short term, the financial hit to the state is entirely front-loaded. When someone new arrives in the country, the state has to fork out immediately for emergency accommodation, initial income supports, and the massive administrative processing required just to get people into the system legally and properly. It's an immediate, heavy drain on resources. At the exact same time, tax contributions from these individuals lag far behind. And look, it's for the simple and obvious reason that you can't pay income tax if you haven't yet secured a job or a work permit. So in this crucial short-term window, those immediate costs absolutely dwarf any initial contributions. There's no getting around that. Now, the numbers here brilliantly illustrate a massive public perception issue in Ireland right now. There's a very common belief out there that direct social welfare handouts are the primary cost driver when new people arrive. But the data tells an entirely different story. Actually, finding physical accommodation and related services takes up a far larger share of the pie initially. Finding beds and paying for them in this market is incredibly expensive. Access to actual welfare supports, on the other hand, is governed by extremely strict eligibility rules. Not everyone gets it, and many of those supports are strictly temporary. So while welfare is certainly a factor, it's actually the physical roof over people's heads that's taking the biggest chunk of change early on.
Section 3. Pressure on working families.
And sure, that short-term funding has to come from somewhere, doesn't it? It comes through higher taxes, reallocation of existing budgets, or government borrowing. And it is totally fair enough that working Irish families are feeling the squeeze right now. Between high tax levels, a brutal cost of living crisis, and local services like GPs and schools that already feel stretched to the absolute breaking point, people are feeling the very real, tangible pressure of those front-loaded costs. There is a massive divide right now between the immediate, on-the-ground strain felt in local communities and the macroeconomics being discussed up in government buildings. Immigration is just one variable in a massive economic system, but it's the one people often feel most acutely in their own towns and villages. Section 4. The long-term payoff. But let's move along the timeline a bit and see how this builds, because this is where the narrative completely shifts. Once a person transitions into the workforce and secures consistent, long-term employment, they start putting their shoulder to the wheel. They begin paying their income tax, PRSI, and USC into the system for years and potentially decades. They're buying groceries, paying rent, paying VAT. Over time, those sustained, reliable tax contributions can eventually offset and even vastly exceed the initial front-loaded costs of their arrival. So the whole picture actually changes from an initial drain to a net gain for the exchequer. So, the crucial point here is that employment is key, but so are earnings. The overall fiscal impact heavily depends on income levels. Why? Because under our tax structure here in Ireland, a relatively small percentage of high earners contribute a massive share of the total income tax pot. If an immigrant secures a high-paying job in tech or pharma, their net contribution to the state's coffers becomes positive very, very quickly. On the flip side, if they're in lower-paid employment, say in retail or hospitality, they contribute less in income tax, meaning that break-even point takes far longer to reach. The specific distribution of those jobs really matters to the overall state budget. Section 5. Ireland's aging population. We also have to zoom out for a second and look at a massive looming crisis for the country, our demographics. Here is the stark reality we're facing as a nation. We have an aging population. Every single year, the demand for healthcare, hospitals, and state pensions is going to drastically increase. And who's going to pay for all of that? We desperately need a younger, working-age demographic to support the system. Because many immigrants arrive already at working age, the state completely bypasses the massive costs of childhood education, child benefit, and pediatric health care that it usually pays for over 18 years. They can enter the labor force and start supporting that aging Irish population almost immediately. It's a massive saving.
Section 6. The true fiscal balance. Honestly, trying to reduce this incredibly complex, moving fiscal machine to an overly simple yes or no is downright absurd. As the source material notes, expecting a one-line answer to a situation this complex wouldn't feel out of place in an episode of Father Ted. Down with this sort of thing, right? You simply cannot distill the reality of global movement, long-term taxation, and state infrastructure into a single pub argument. It's a dynamic, constantly shifting balance sheet. The absolute truth of the matter is that practically everyone contributes eventually, but the balance completely flips depending on the time frame you're looking at. In the short term, costs absolutely can and do exceed contributions. The state and local working families definitely feel the pinch, but in the long term, those steady contributions can offset or far exceed the initial costs. The entire outcome depends on employment rates, earnings, integration speed, and the specific policy decisions being made by the government today to manage the pressure on public services. Which leaves us with the next massive piece of the puzzle. If the state's balance sheet evens out over time, what about your own pocket? In our upcoming explainer, we're going to explore exactly how all of this impacts the local labor market. Is it driving down wages? Is it creating new jobs? Is immigration actually helping or hurting Irish workers financially on a day-to-day basis? That's what we'll be breaking down next, and I promise you the data might just surprise you. Thanks a million for watching, and we'll see you then.